Let's talk about Air India Flight 171. It was supposed to be a totally routine flight, Ahmedabad to London. You've got 242 people on board, settling in for a 9-hour trip. But it all ended in just a matter of seconds, right after takeoff, because of something truly mysterious that happened inside the cockpit.
Just imagine hearing this. These are the last words ever picked up by the cockpit voice recorder. It's a simple, absolutely bone-chilling back and forth between the pilots, and it's the heart of this whole mystery. One pilot says, "You turned it off." The other says, "No, I didn't." So, what's the real story here?
On June 12, 2025, the plane's wheels had barely left the ground when it all went wrong. The massive Boeing 787 just started to fall. For every single person on that plane, the journey was over before it had even really started.
Okay, so to figure out why this tragedy happened, we first have to get a clear picture of exactly what happened. Let's break down the plane's final, horrifying moments, literally second by second.
The speed of this is just staggering. It is hard to even comprehend. At 1:39 and 9 seconds, the plane hits the first trees. Almost in the same instant, the nose gear is ripped off by a chimney. A second later, bam! The fuselage hits one building, the right wing is torn off by another. And then, just a second and a half after that, the entire fuel-laden plane explodes. We're talking less than 3 seconds to go from a state-of-the-art aircraft to complete devastation.
And this number tells a story of pure desperation. 150 knots. To put that into perspective for you, that's over 170 miles per hour. The data shows that right up to the very last fraction of a second, the pilots were yanking back on the controls, fighting with everything they had to get the nose up and clear those buildings. They never, ever gave up.
So the key to solving the why of all this, it's gotta be in the flight recorders, right? The famous black boxes. Well, yes. But it turns out just getting the data off them was a whole new challenge for investigators.
So on a Boeing 787, there are 2 of these recorders. The one in the tail, it was just obliterated by the crash and the fire. Gone. But the one up front, it actually survived. The problem was, India's investigation bureau didn't have the very specific piece of equipment, it's called a golden chassis, that they needed to actually read the data. They had to get one shipped all the way from the NTSB in the US, which meant everyone had to wait for answers.
So once they finally got it, what did that data show? Well, let me put it this way, using a pretty simple analogy. Imagine your car. If you run out of gas, the car's computer just knows the engine stopped. But if you physically reach out and turn the key, it records 2 things, that the engine is off and that the ignition switch was turned. That little distinction, it changes everything.
And boom! That's exactly what the black box from Flight 171 showed. It wasn't just that the engines lost power. The data was crystal clear. The fuel cutoff switches in the cockpit were physically moved into the off position. This was no accident of mechanics. It was a direct physical action.
Now, this one piece of information was huge. It gave investigators a laser focus. The question was no longer what happened, but how. And it all boiled down to 4 possible explanations for how those switches got moved.
So, the entire investigation basically came down to these 4 theories. Let's walk through them just like the investigators did. First, maybe the data was wrong and the switches never moved. Second, maybe a software glitch did it. Third, maybe it was a pure accident. And the fourth is the most disturbing, that somebody flipped them on purpose.
Okay, so theory number 1, that the switches didn't move, we can throw that one out right away. Remember our car analogy? The wiring on the 787 is a direct physical line from the switch to the recorder. There's no software in the middle, no room for misinterpretation. If the box says the switch moved, you better believe it moved. End of story.
All right, what about a software failure? This is where a safety system called TCMA comes into play. Basically, it's a feature that can automatically cut engine power if it thinks something's gone wrong and the engine is creating way too much thrust. So could that be our culprit?
Well, no. And here's why. The TCMA system has a critical feature. Once it triggers, it's a one-way street. You cannot reverse it in the air. It has to be reset by a maintenance crew on the ground. But, and this is a huge but, we know from the flight data that the pilots of Air India 171 actually did manage to restart the engines for a moment. That would have been completely impossible if TCMA had been the cause. So, you can scratch theory 2.
So that brings us to theory 3, accidental activation. Maybe a pilot just bumped it, right? Well, Boeing engineers thought of that.
These switches are not like the light switches in your house. They're spring-loaded, so you have to deliberately pinch and lift them up. They're surrounded by raised guards to stop you from bumping them. They're literally designed to be foolproof.
So now think about this. With all those layers of protection, the chances of accidentally flipping one of them are incredibly low. But to flip both of them? And get this, to do it within a single second of each other? I mean, you can never say never, but it is so ridiculously unlikely that it's practically impossible.
And so, after you've gone through the process of elimination, when you've crossed off all the other possibilities, you're left with just one theory that holds up. The evidence points overwhelmingly to the switches being moved deliberately, on purpose.
But just when you think the case is closed, the data reveals one last, totally baffling puzzle. When the flight path was recreated in a detailed 3D simulation, something really strange popped up, a discrepancy that's a real head-scratcher.
Take a look at this. On one side, you have the official preliminary report. It says the plane hit its top speed of 180 knots before the engines were cut. But then, you have this incredibly precise simulation, which tells a completely different story. It shows the plane didn't just maintain speed after the engines cut out, it kept accelerating for 5 whole seconds, hitting a much faster top speed of 196 knots.
And this, well, this just shouldn't be possible. It's basic physics, right? A plane gets its push forward from its engines. You kill the engines, you kill the thrust. The plane should start slowing down from drag. But this one, it's sped up.
And so that's the final, haunting question we're left with. While the evidence gives us a pretty clear picture of what likely happened in that cockpit, the black box data itself leaves us with this ghost in the machine. Why would a 200-ton airliner, with its engines suddenly silent, continue to gain speed? It's a puzzle that,